I'm supposed to be sharing on the topic, the purpose and meaning of life today with all of you here. I prefer to change the topic into a question. I think it makes it more flexible. What is the purpose and meaning of life? Now let's look at human life for a start. When human life starts and the baby is born, the purpose and meaning of life of that baby is very basic. The most important purpose of life for that baby is survival. Just to survive, to be given the basic needs by the parents. As the child grows up, he begins to move around and play with toys. For him at that moment, as he grows up from the stage of a baby to a little child, and he's able to play with toys, the purpose and meaning of life for him changes. For him now is the enjoyment of pleasures of the senses, to be contented and satisfied when his sense pleasures are gratified. But there's a psychology involved in playing too. In the old days when I was a little kid, we used to be very inventive. We folded paper and made little boats and aeroplanes, and we put them on the water or threw them in the air. We used to play kites. Playtime becomes an interesting period for us to be inventive, to be creative, and to enjoy doing that. As we grow older, we begin to play with other children. And that itself is also a lesson to be learned, because when you play with other children, it's different from playing with yourself. If you're playing with yourself, you can afford to indulge in all your feelings, your whims and fancies. When you play with other children, it is a lesson in interrelationship. You have to give and take. You have to exercise some form of control over your emotions, to forgive and forget, to compromise. When we are little kids and we live only with our parents and we don't mix with other kids, we tend to be pampered because our parents are always making sure that we're happy and all our needs are met. So when we play with other children, that's a time when we start to learn interpersonal relationships, how we must control our senses, how we must control our emotions to some extent, how we must be able to compromise our wants and understand the needs of other people. In that period of human development, the meaning and purpose of life is to cultivate skills in interpersonal relationship. And that involves having a certain degree of control over one's emotions and understanding for other people's needs. Needs also the ability to compromise your own needs with that of others. As the child grows, then physically there is a greater change. Young girls and little boys may play together innocently, but when they come to the age of puberty, a natural shyness comes in. There's discrimination between the sexes. When I was a little boy, there was a time when we thought it was very sissy to play with girls. The boys would only play among themselves. They wouldn't want to play with girls. So any boy who plays with a girl would be considered sissy. That's a young age of development. When you grow to a later age of development, when you reach puberty and adolescence, there's a time when the hormones are working in your body and you become physically mature, but mentally or emotionally immature. So you are in between, neither a kid nor an adult. You may be physically mature and you can start to procreate. As you know, in India, in the old days, people get married at the age of 15 or 16. Although you may be physically matured enough to start a family of your own, you are still emotionally immature, unstable. So that's a time of great conflict for the adolescent as well as for the parents. There's a time when the adolescent starts to want to have independence and want to assert his or her own individuality. So at that moment, the purpose and meaning of life is to explore the pleasures of the senses that have now become more acute, and also to assert one's own individuality. All this while, prior to puberty, the child has been very obedient, listening to what the parents say. Parents are very happy with little children because they always listen to what the parents say. When you ask them to sit, they will sit. When you ask them to wear a certain dress, they will comply. But come adolescence, come puberty, there is rebelliousness. And that's the most difficult stage of life. But it's something very perennial, it's something very universal. It's not only confined to this present generation. This has happened all along because this is part and parcel of human developmental psychology. So at that time, the purpose and meaning of life for parents are how to deal with this situation. What happened to my child? He or she was such an obedient and loving child, and now is so rebellious and wanting to be so independent, wanting to be so assertive. And it becomes a great source of unhappiness and suffering in the family. A few months ago, one very indignant and disturbed father came out to help in landscaping in Sasnaraka Buddhist Sanctuary in Taiping, and he was complaining to me about his boy. He says his boy is very smart, but he's very rebellious, and he will dye his hair red and green and put earrings. And he was very, very disturbed because he came from an older generation and he expected his boy to have short hair, not to have long hair. But here he was, long hair, and not only long, dyed in different colors. Pink and green, imagine, wearing earrings. He was very concerned for his child, and he says, well, make sure when you get your earlobes pricked, you don't get AIDS. But that's the way it is. That's life. Life is full of suffering, and you see it in all stages of life. And in this particular stage, the purpose and meaning of life for the adolescent and the parent will be very different. The adolescent would want to assert his individuality and would want independence, while the parents feel a loss of authority and also can be very anguished to find that their child has turned into someone very unloving and very inconsiderate and ungrateful. This is not something very new. When I was young, I also had problems with my father. When I was in university, it was the trend at that time to keep long hair. Nowadays, it's the trend to be skinhead. If your father belonged to the generation where they keep long hair, and he's still in that fashion, he will be shocked to see that his son is now skinhead, right? So during my time, my father was, short hair. And when I tried to keep long hair when I was in U and had a goatee and mustache, he was really shocked and he gave me an ultimatum. You better get yourself cleaned up by... Well, it was not easy. So by that date, there was tension in the house. We had a showdown and we started to talk terms. He was not very happy, but I told him, well, you are different persons, you are you and I am I. You have a right to keep short hair. After having gone through puberty and adolescence, one is also obliged to abide by one's parents' wishes to some extent, even though one is trying to assert one's individuality and independence. One must be realistic to admit that one is still dependent on them for financial support. Your parents have to spend a lot of money to put you here in the university. And because of that, many young people are pressured into working hard. Of course, parents will not spare the time and effort to remind you that they have actually worked a lot, worked very hard to try to support you to university. And of course, being reminded of that constantly, you are pressured to do well in your exams. Make sure that you come out with flying colors, with a degree, with a piece of paper. So that becomes the purpose of life for most of you here. The purpose and meaning of life now is to pass your exams and get your piece of paper, right? If your parents are taking a loan, then you have to work to repay the loan. However, while you're in university, you meet up with people and you might fall in love, and then that changes your purpose and meaning of life again. So now your purpose and meaning of life is not just to meet your parents' expectations, but now you've got something on. After you pay the loan, you're going to get married, you're going to settle down, you're going to get a big house, get a good car, get a good job. And so the purpose and meaning of life becomes more complicated as you grow older. And then what happens in the end? After you've got your piece of paper, after you've got married, you've got your children, you've got your property, you've got a good job in the corporate world, trying very hard to climb the corporate ladder up at the top. In the end, you have to support your children. The meaning and purpose of life then becomes to work hard. I'd like to share a little story that I heard in a Dhamma talk given by a Burmese monk. There are two stories actually. One is of a Burmese couple and one is of an English couple. This Burmese couple were college mates or uni mates of this Burmese monk. They were in college together, in university together. After they graduated, they went their separate ways. And then later on in life, they met again in Yangon. At that time, both of them were engaged in their occupations. They fell in love, decided to get married and set up a family. Worked very hard until they were very, very successful in life. They had about 20 cars in Burma, a fleet of cars and hundreds of workers and at least 5 servants to take care of their mansion. Come the age of over 40, and they were reaching 50, they start to evaluate their values in life. They start to ask themselves, why are we doing all this? They get up very early in the morning at about 6 o'clock and don't go to bed until 10 o'clock at night, working like mad the whole day to earn money. And they don't even have time to have some quiet moments with themselves or to spend with their children. Then life becomes very meaningless and mechanical. It's just work, get money, but you can't even use the money to enjoy yourself. One of our participants in the Introduction to Manhood program said, he doesn't see any difference between a very successful corporate person and a construction worker. Both of them are also working like mad. Both of them are also getting a lot of money, right? Well, the construction worker has to get enough money to support his family and meet his physical needs, his rent and food and clothing, and shelter, whatever. Well, this corporate person does the same thing. It's just that he has to pay a higher sum to pay for his condo, his aircon, his limousine, his driver. But they're all doing basically the same thing. The other story is about an Englishman. His parents were very well educated and probably they were also in the same profession. They were in the medical profession. The parents were not religious people. He was brought up in such an environment. He worked very hard. He went to the university, got his medical degree, set up his own practice and became very rich. Got married, had a daughter. And when he reached middle age, he started to reevaluate his values. Suddenly, life became very meaningless to him. The humdrum of just seeing patients every day, getting money, coming back home, seeing the same old wife at home, listening to the same music, coming to the same house, driving the same car. And he felt very unhappy and dissatisfied with life. And he tried various things to find out if there was any meaning in life more than what he was just doing. He stopped practicing because he couldn't enjoy doing his work anymore. Sold off his practice, sold off his car. He had one limousine and one little, like a kantil, I guess. And then later on, he sent his daughter to boarding school, set up a fund for her so that she can be supported throughout her education, divorced the wife, and just took his passport, his credit card, and drove around. Just like a hippie, staying from one hotel to another, just moving around, trying to find meaning in life, to find satisfaction and happiness in life. He tried drugs, he tried everything that he could to satisfy his sensual desires. All the pleasures of the senses were explored by him, still could not find any happiness or contentment. He traveled out of England, he went to Burma, he went to India, to Thailand, to Japan, to Korea, went around the world. He was very rich. He still had a lot of money in the bank. At the end of his travels, he still was unhappy and discontented. He didn't find life meaningful. One day, he took his credit card and his passport and went to see a close friend. And he told his friend, I gave up my practice, I gave up my wife, my daughter is in boarding school, I sold my car, and now I've just got these two things, just my passport and my credit card. If I threw away these two, then I'll be free. So his friend said, don't you do that. By throwing away your passport and your credit card doesn't mean that you'll be free. And he knew that he was searching for something more profound than what we can find in life. And his friend had meditated before in a meditation center, and so he suggested to him, why don't you try meditation? Perhaps it could help you give direction or give you clarity of mind. And since he's tried everything else in the world, he says, why not? Just another option. He went into a meditation center in Burma where they taught a 10-day retreat. So for the first 3 days, he was just required to watch his breath. Very easy. All you need to do is just sit in a room, meditate, keep your attention on the breath as you breathe in and out. It's so easy in words that it's so very difficult to practice. He said that for the first 3 days of his retreat, it was hell. You try to keep your mind still and you will know that how difficult it is. The mind is like a monkey. When you are trying to keep it still, you will have all sorts of thoughts that come to disturb you. Memories of the past, regrets, remorse of things that you have done, fantasies of sense pleasures that you miss because you are now in retreat. But after the 3 days is over, as he switched to a more panoramic awareness, trying to observe the physical sensations in his body, then towards the end of the 10 days, he realized that he had found what he wanted. That was the meaning of life for him at that time. So from that time on, he went in and out of retreat, and eventually, as he developed and matured in meditation, compassion and unconditional love arose in him. And he felt very sorry for divorcing his wife. So he went back home, looked for his ex-wife, and tried to make amends. And they got married again for the second time. But this time he said that they got married for a different reason. The first time they got married was because of passion. The second time he got married was because of compassion, not passion. It was because he felt very sorry for what he had done to her, leaving her like that. And he got her back because she was a Roman Catholic, and he wanted to encourage her to meditate so that she too could experience the peace, joy, and meaningfulness that he experienced. So these are just two stories to show you the different stages of human developmental psychology and how the purpose and meaning of life changes as one passes from one stage to another. So that answers the question, what is the purpose and meaning of life? The purpose of meaning of life depends on which stage of development you are in. But if you ask the question, what is the ultimate purpose and meaning of life, that would be really different. The purpose and meaning of life that changes as you move along human developmental stages is not ultimate in nature. It changes because of circumstances. I think that this question, what is the purpose and meaning of life, is a very common question that most people ask. I asked this question when I was young, and so did my sister, and so did many other people. But when you're a young person and you ask this question, your parents will tell you, oh, shut up, don't think too much. Because nobody can answer that question for you. In the end, what they do is they just sweep it under the carpet. Since you can't answer it, just sweep it under the carpet and just follow what everybody else is doing. And what everybody else is doing is a very routine stuff. Right? We went through that just now. As you grow up, your hormones play havoc on your body. It will stimulate your senses. You try to satisfy your sense desires. After that, out of passion, you get married, you settle down. Then when your passion cools down, then you find that you already have children, you already have all this landed property, and you have to earn money to support them, to pay for the loans that you have taken. So it doesn't matter whether you're a construction worker or you're a corporate person, or whether you're a lecturer or a student, you're all doing the same thing, earning money to satisfy your basic desires and additional desires, not only basic. So that's what life is. You're born, you grow up, you study, you get a degree, you get a good job, start a family, and then support your children, become your children's slaves. If you're a woman, then after you have supported your children and they grew up, then you have to take care of your grandchildren. After taking care of your children, you have to take care of your grandchildren. Being a woman is not easy. And then when you get old, you die, and then you start again from the womb if you come back as a human being. So the purpose and meaning of life goes on again and again, repeating itself from life to life, life to life. If you're lucky to come back as a human being. If you're not so lucky, as a human being, you do a lot of unwholesome things. You break the 5 precepts, you kill, you steal, you commit sexual misconduct, you deceive people, you lie for your own advantage, you get intoxicated by drugs and alcohol. You break the precepts, you are actually creating the potential for rebirth in the lower realm. It doesn't mean that if you swat a mosquito, you're going to be reborn as a hungry ghost or go to hell the next life. We have done a lot of good and bad things in life, a lot of wholesome and unwholesome things in life. We're talking in terms of probabilities and possibilities. The more unwholesome things that you do, the greater is the possibility that before you die, you're going to have a wholesome thought that will generate rebirth in a good existence. If you do a lot of evil things, a lot of unwholesome things through mind, speech, or through actions, that increases the possibility that you're going to have an unwholesome thought, regret, remorse, a grudge before you die that could create the karma for you to be reborn in an unfavorable existence. If you happen to be born in an unfavorable existence after a human birth, then you're in for trouble. Because if you're born as a tiger, for example, you got no chance to do any wholesome deeds. You'll be killing all the time to satisfy your basic needs of survival. And that's creating even more bad karma. So from the Buddhist point of view, the ultimate purpose and meaning of life is to go beyond it. Go beyond the cycle of repeating the whole same process again and again and again from life to life. And how does it work? How does one go beyond life and death? Some people say that Buddhism is a very pessimistic religion because it always talks about suffering. What's the first noble truth? Suffering, right? The second noble truth is the cause of suffering. The third noble truth is the cessation of suffering. And the fourth noble truth is the way that leads to the cessation of suffering. That's putting it in a negative way. If you want to put it in a positive way, you could say that, well, the Buddha talks about happiness, real happiness. You start off with, there is such a thing as real happiness. There's a way that leads to real happiness. And there's also unreal happiness, which is suffering, and the causes of unreal happiness. So what is real happiness and what is unreal happiness? At one time, I was attending a yoga course, and the teacher invited me to give a talk on the Four Noble Truths and the Noble Eightfold Path. When we talked about suffering, he questioned whether what the Buddha meant is actually understood by us. He said that he does not understand how life can be suffering when we are now relatively comfortable sitting in an aircon room. Are you suffering? I'm sure you will say you're not suffering. You're comfortable here. Unless you're very scared of cold, you might be shivering. That might be suffering. But otherwise, it's very nice weather compared to outside. So his interpretation of what the Buddha meant by suffering and the cause of suffering is that if one has unrealistic desires and expectations, that will lead to suffering. Do you agree? It's right, isn't it? But are you enlightened? The cause of suffering is unrealistic desires or expectations. If you know, for example, that you're not really very intelligent, you're not a genius, you study very hard, but if you have false expectations thinking that you're going to score distinctions for all your subjects, and then when the results come out, you find that you got only a B or a C, that will be disaster, isn't it? Because you had false expectations. But you don't need a Sama Sambuddha to be able to realize that. Everybody knows that if you have unrealistic desire, you're going to have disappointment, you're going to have frustration. The suffering that the Buddha talked about is more subtle. So subtle, in fact, that normal people cannot understand it unless you meditate or unless you are a very exceptional person in terms of spiritual maturity. Before we talk about suffering, let's come back to real happiness and unreal happiness. Real happiness is that which is everlasting, which is not impermanent, which does not arise and pass away. Everything that we can perceive through our senses do not last. Right? If you see something, that beautiful sight will not last forever. You hear a sound, a piece of beautiful music, it doesn't last forever. If you listen to that beautiful piece of music again and again and again for one whole day, you'll get sick of it. It's the same for any of our five senses. You see, hear, smell, taste, or feel with the body. You might get married to a very handsome boy or a beautiful woman, or Miss World or Miss Universe. You get sick of her, even before wrinkles appear on the face. Even our thoughts and emotions, the happiness, the joy that we feel when we experience pleasant objects of the senses, these don't last. You can't be happy all the time. Neither can you be sad or depressed all the time. So what is it that is real? Real happiness is something beyond what we can experience through our five senses. Unreal happiness are all those pleasant moments that we experience when we perceive pleasant objects of the senses. Pleasant sights, sounds, tastes, smells, bodily contact, sensations. But in order to achieve this real happiness, one has to really get sick of the unreal happiness. Right? To give you an example, if you buy a brand new car, you're so proud of your car that if anybody were to scratch it, you will have a heartache. Unless you are a developed person. Now, after you have bought a brand new car, you wouldn't ever think of wanting to give it away or sell it away or get a new one unless and until you get sick of it one fine day. You'll find that, oh, somebody else has got a bigger car, a newer model has appeared, and it's got more features, brings you more status. When you see all the faults of your old car, then only will you be willing to give it up. Right? So it's the same thing with our senses. As long as we are not sick of our senses, of the experiences that we can get through perceiving pleasant objects to the senses, we will be stuck in there. We will be experiencing it again and again, and we will never get out of it. So the way to do it is to observe all your experiences through the sense doors, through your five senses, as well as your mind door, which is your mind, your emotions. To be able to see that they are actually in a perpetual flux. They are rising and passing away from moment to moment. This is not something very new to you. If you study biology, you study physics, you will know that we are all composed of atoms and molecules. Right? It's very common knowledge. If you study physics, you'll know that the fluorescent lamp up there is fluctuating about 60 times per second. It's going on and off because it's an AC current. But you don't perceive it. You only know theoretically. You know theoretically through the practice of mindfulness meditation, where one observes whatever that one can perceive through all our senses. You can develop clarity of mind, concentration of mind, so focused that you can perceive this arising and passing away from moment to moment. And when you have seen that thoroughly yourself, not theoretically, not thinking about it, not in terms of a mathematical formula, but actually see it as though you're seeing with your own eyes, then you're willing to let go. It is all impermanent. And when you have seen enough, automatically you reach the real happiness. So what is that real happiness? That real happiness is called nirvana. It does not come into being because of conditions, and it is permanent. It does not arise and pass away, like what we can experience through our five senses. The experience of nirvana itself is done through the mind door. I mean, the mind is able to perceive it through your mind's eye. But the experience per se, although it is very spectacular, very supernormal, something you can never compare with anything that you can experience through your sense doors. The experience per se is nothing compared to what the consequences are. The consequences of the first glimpse of nirvana are that one begins to cut off this cycle of birth and death. This is called the first stage of enlightenment. When a person has achieved the first stage of enlightenment, he has actually cut down his future existences to just 7 more lifetimes. How much is 7 lifetimes compared to infinity? One day the Buddha was walking with a group of monks near the Ganges river. He bent down and picked up a handful of sand from the Ganges. And he asked the monks, "Monks, look at the handful of sand in my palm. Which is greater, the handful of sand in my palm or the sand in the whole Ganges river and along its banks?" And the monk said, "Of course, Bhante, the handful of sand that we have is nothing compared to the sand in the Ganges." Then the Buddha said, "So it is, monks. The suffering left for a person who has attained the first stage of enlightenment is comparable to this handful of sand. And the suffering that people who are not enlightened will have to face is comparable to all the sand in the Ganges. Because 7 lifetimes compared to infinity is just amazing." Okay, that's the reason why people become monks. It's not so easy to practice when you're a lay person. During the Buddha's time, there was a person by the name of Ratthapala. He attended the Dhamma talk given by the Buddha, at the end of which he reflected, "As I understand the Dhamma taught by the Buddha, it's not easy as a layperson to practice the Dhamma fully. What if I were to shave off my hair, don the robes, and go forth into homelessness?" So he had this thought in mind, and then later on he asked the Buddha permission, and the Buddha asked him, "We don't ordain anyone unless you get permission from your parents. Have you obtained permission from your parents?" And he said, "No, he hasn't." So he went back home to ask his parents permission. But he was the only son, so the parents refused to give him permission. So he went on a hunger strike, 7 days. Immediately he lay down on the floor and said, "Either I become a monk or I die." The parents say, "You're our only son. Even if you were to die, we will part unwillingly with you. Now that you're still alive, you want to part with us? How can that be?" And they tried to encourage him to give up his idea, but he would not give in. So as he lay there, his parents went to ask his friends to come and talk him out. And when his friends came, they tried to convince him, but he did not say anything. He was very, very insistent that he wanted to leave the world. Eventually, since his friends found out that they could not convince him otherwise, so they went to tell the parents, "Your son is lying there, and he's going to die if you don't allow him to become a monk. But if he becomes a monk, he might still come back to see you. And if he's unhappy being a monk, where else will he go but come back home?" So the parents relented and let him become a monk. And he disappeared for 12 years. And by that time, he had become enlightened to the 4th stage of enlightenment. He had become an arahant, one who has eradicated all defilements. Then he came back home, but his parents could not recognize him. 12 years is a long time. And he was at that time the only son of the leading family in that town. Very rich and wealthy. So after being a monk, living a very austere life, he would have changed completely. Eventually he went to stay in a park near his parents' house. And there the king, when he heard that he had come, went to see him. Even when he was a layperson, the king was already very inspired by him and admired him for leaving the world to become a monk, because he was the only son of the richest family in town. So the king went to see him, paid his respects to him, and asked him several questions. He said there are 4 things that ruin people. One is misfortune due to sickness, misfortune due to old age, to loss of property, or the loss of relatives. Some people, because they are sick and they can't get good treatment, they become monks. Some people are not successful in life. Whatever they do cannot be successful, so they decide to become monks. Some people, because their parents and relatives die and they've got no one to support them, they become monks. And the king said, "Well, none of these things have happened to you. You were handsome, you were in the prime of youth, you could enjoy all the sensual pleasures at that time, and yet you renounced. Why is that so? You were very wealthy, you were very successful in life, so there's no reason." And Ratthapala at that time said, "It is on account of these 4 things that I heard the Buddha saying that spurred me to renounce the world and seek liberation." What are these 4 things? The first thing the Buddha said was that the world is continually led away. Second, he said that the world has no protector. Third, he said the desires of the world are insatiable. Fourth, he said that everything in the world must be left behind. Can you understand that? It's not so easy to understand. So the king could not understand this brief statement, and so he asked the Venerable to elaborate. So the Venerable asked him, Great King, when you were younger, were you an expert in archery, in swordsmanship, in horse riding? Were you as strong as a young man could be? And the king said, yeah, when I was a young man, I was so strong that I couldn't see anyone who could challenge me. During those times, being a king meant that you had to be physically strong. Not like nowadays, if you're a president, you just have to be politically or financially well off or influential. How about now, great king? Asked the Venerable. And the king said, but now I'm old, almost 80, and I'm so frail, I can hardly compare to my young age. And so, said the Venerable, that's why the Buddha said, everything in this world is led away by aging. You may be at the prime of your youth, but one day you're going to age, and then all your youth will be gone. You may be Miss World or Miss Universe, one day you're going to be wrinkled and you'll be led away. So, by hearing that, he was seized by a sense of urgency. Of course, not everybody will be seized by that sense of urgency, unless you are spiritually matured. Different people at different stages of spiritual maturity. It's just like when you were younger. When you were a small kid, certain toys appealed to you. Then later on, you grew out of the toys and then you wanted to go in for more things that are in fashion. Then you grew out of that and then you wanted to go after boys or after girls. And then you grew out of that. So your needs keep on changing. But in the end, as you grow older, you're led away from the pleasures that you can enjoy as a youth. So the king agreed through his own experience. The second thing he said was, there's no protector in this world. And then the king was not agreeable to that because he said, I'm so powerful. You see, I have all my cavalry and my elephant troops and so forth. Nowadays, if you look at the United States, it's supposed to be the most powerful country on earth. They are, would say, protectors of their own kind. Then he asked the king, supposing you got sick. Supposing one of you suddenly got sick and somebody pronounced that you had a tumor somewhere, tumor in your breast or in your lungs, took it out for biopsy, found that it's malignant, found that you have cancer. Who's going to protect you? Could you tell your parents or your friends, oh, please stand in for me. Stand in for me and let me go. Could your parents, because they love you so much, they say, oh, let me have the cancer. You're still young. Go and enjoy your life. Your future is more important. Nobody can do that for you. There's no protector for you when it comes to illness and suffering like that. The third thing he said was, the desires of this world are insatiable. That's true, isn't it? There's no end to desire. After you have satisfied one desire, then another one will come. After you are sick of that object that satisfied your desire, you will have to change to a new object. You keep on changing objects, and as long as there's desire, there will be no end to it. I think that's the basic principle upon which economics is based. Economics says that there's no end to desire, and there's limited resources, right? So therefore, we have to allocate resources to satisfy desires in a proper way. So desires are insatiable. You can never satisfy a desire. After you have earned your degree, if you might want to go for a master's. After that, you might want to go for a PhD. After that, you want to go for associate professorship. After you want to become a professor. Or you go to the corporate world, you start off somewhere and then you want to be managing director, you want to be CEO and so forth. There's no end to it. But finally, everything must be left behind when you die. Whatever you do, however rich you become, all your property, all your success, all your fame, all your fortune will have to be left behind when you die. When you're at your deathbed, what are you going to take away with you? And you'll be left behind for whom? For your heirs. And what are your heirs going to do with your money, with your fortune? Rich men's sons are the most pampered, and they will just squander away all your money that you have worked so hard for. You have heard many stories And I think there's something very common to you. Multi-millionaires, very successful people who committed suicide. Someone just told me another story of another multi-billionaire. His son also committed suicide. With all the pleasures of the world that can be bought with money and fame and fortune, how come there's still unhappiness? Where does unhappiness come from? So satisfying the desires of the senses and getting material prosperity. There is a story of a basket weaver. He earned his living by weaving baskets for sale, and he lived in a ramshackle hut in the country. One fine day, a businessman from town came to the country and saw this poor, wretched basket weaver making baskets. And he was filled with compassion at that time, gave him a 100 ringgit note. And that basket weaver had never seen a 100 ringgit note before, living in the very Uru district. Or maybe you say US $100 better now. 100 ringgit nowadays, not much. USD 100. He saw it and his eyes was open and he says, wow, I've never seen that before in my whole life. And he thanked the businessman profusely. And then he guarded his USD 100 very, very jealously. Put it under his bed, made sure that there are no thieves looking, and no robbers around. And he had a sleepless night because the whole night he was worrying about his 100 USD. Any noise woke him up. Oh, is there a thief around? Is there a robber around? And in the daytime, when he wanted to go to market, go to town, he was very scared to take the money with him in case of pickpockets or anybody would rob him along the way. There's so many snatch thieves these days. You never know what's going to happen. And if he left it at home, when he's out there, he's thinking of his money. So he had no peace of mind. From a poor, wretched basket maker, he became even poorer. Although he was rich in terms of money, he was poor in happiness. Eventually, he managed to look for this rich businessman. He took his 100 USD, gave it back to him, and said, here you are. Please take back your USD 100 and give me back my happiness. So the purpose and meaning of life is happiness. And to achieve happiness doesn't mean that you have to satisfy all the pleasures of your senses. It doesn't mean that you have to be rich and prosperous and successful in life. It means to be able to cultivate peace of mind and contentment, not necessarily complacency, but contentment with what you have. That's the ultimate purpose and meaning of life from the Buddhist point of view. Of course, there are various degrees of happiness, and the highest degree of happiness is to go beyond life and death to achieve nirvana. So that is how I would like to conclude the talk. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask. Yes.
You are saying that Buddhism is we don't believe on God, life after death.
Did I say that? No. What I said was, if you are able to just meditate and focus on the five senses, being in the present moment, there's one aspect of Buddhism that I like. It doesn't require you to believe in anything. It's something that you can experience here and now, and gives you peace and happiness here and now, not something promised, So they, well, I do this and you do this, and then after you die, you're going to get eternal happiness. No. It's something that you can enjoy and experience right now. There's one aspect of Buddhism that I like. But there are also other aspects of Buddhism which talk about life after death, about gods, and about different realms of existence, about good and bad karma. Buddhism has a very wide range of topics. At one time, the Buddha was asked, what is the meaning of nirvana? What do you mean by the Dhamma being something that can be experienced here and now? And the Buddha said, when greed, hatred, and delusion arises in you, can you be aware that greed is there when it's there, attachment is there when it's there, anger is there when it's there? When you're able to do that, that itself is one type of nirvana. It's one type of seeing according to reality. And when there's no greed, no hatred, no delusion, that's nirvana. Because nirvana means an absence of all these defilements of mind.
No suffering.
No suffering.
So nirvana is the real happiness.
It's the real happiness, yes.
So the real happiness is the absence of suffering.
Yes. Suffering is defined in three aspects. First aspect is called dukkha dukkha, the suffering of suffering. Everybody knows. If you get hurt physically, you suffer. If you get hurt emotionally, you suffer. Nobody can deny. The second sort of suffering is more elusive. The second sort of suffering is called viparinama dukkha, which means transformative suffering. It is happiness in disguise. When you're happy and when you're having pleasant moments, suffering is inherent in it, because when it goes away, you're going to hanker after it. If you're attached to the happiness that you are experiencing, that will bring you suffering later on. If you're not attached, it's okay. You just watch it arise, pass away, you're not attached. But if you're attached and you hanker after it when it's not there, that brings you suffering. The third type of suffering is the suffering that can only be experienced by meditators. It's the suffering that can be experienced when you see the incessant arising and passing away of phenomena from moment to moment. Let me describe an experiment that was done in the United States in 1984. I think that experiment was done after my teacher and I went to the States in 1984. We conducted a 3-month meditation retreat, and some research scientists from Harvard University came and did some tests on the yogis or meditators before and after the course. They used a T-scope. Any physicists here? You know what's a T-scope? A T-scope is a certain apparatus that has a screen. It's like a radar, and you can actually manipulate the rate of sparking. So there's a spark followed by another spark. And that spark, let's say there's a spark, and then there's 1 second and another spark. Then they will narrow the timing in between. So instead of 1 second, it'll be half second. Then it will be quarter of a second, 1 millisecond, and so forth. They are trying to find the threshold of that particular person. At what point of time, at what rate will he see only 1 spark instead of 2? You know what I mean? So they are sparking, getting closer. Instead of 2 sparks, he sees only 1 spark. So that is his threshold. Then, after 3 months retreat, they'll repeat the test. And what the yogi, the meditator, saw before the retreat was 1 spark when they're actually 2. You cannot differentiate that there are 2 sparks because they are too near each other. At the end of the retreat, you could see the beginning, the middle, and ending of the first spark, and then there's a gap in between the beginning, the middle, and ending of the second spark at the same rate. This is one quantitative way of measuring how you can increase the concentration, the focus of your mind through mindfulness practice. So their study shows that for some yogis, the threshold level increased to 500%, which means that they can actually see the fluorescent lamp fluctuating, which you can't see, which means that they can actually see the so-called atoms and molecules in the body arising and passing away from moment to moment, which means that they can see your thoughts arising and passing away from moment to moment. And that is the sort of experience, personal experience you need in order to see suffering. When you see things are arising and passing away from moment to moment, you have nothing to hold on to, That is great suffering. There's no security. Whatever that you can experience through your 5 senses or even through your mind, it's all dissolving from moment to moment. So that is the sort of suffering that the Buddha talked about. That is the sort of suffering that is inherent in all our sense perceptions, which we are not aware of because we don't see. We have not developed that degree of concentration or mindfulness. So when you have seen that and you're really sick of it, it's like getting hold of your old car. Right? That's enough. Pop, and then your mind will just go to nirvana, and you will take nirvana as an object. Now, what is nirvana? It's not something very easy to explain. Let me give you a simile. It's like the sky. What is the sky to you? The sky is something blue and it's void. There's nothing there. Right? You can't put a sky into a matchbox, can you? But you can explain. The sky is actually void, blank. There's nothing there. You can say it's blue, but blue is not actually the color of the sky. You can see the sky because you have eyes. You try to explain the sky to a person who is born blind, he will not be able to understand what you're trying to say. Right? Why? Because he cannot see. So it is with nirvana. Nirvana is an external reality that can be perceived through the eye of wisdom. You have developed meditation to such an extent, you have seen enough of phenomena through your six senses arising and passing away. You're so sick of them that you take the leap to something that is not arising and passing away. Something that is stable, something that is permanent. All these things are impermanent. They are in a constant flux all the time. So when you've seen enough of that, you let go, pop, you are there. Nirvana is not something that you can grasp at, not something that you want, you can desire. It's something that you automatically can attain when you let go completely. When you let go completely, automatically, pop is there. If you desire Nibbana and you meditate, you won't get it. It's a paradox. As long as there's any slight attachment or desire in you for anything mundane or supramundane, or concept of what is supramundane, then you will not achieve Nibbana. So as I said, the experience of Nibbana is very liberating and is fantastic. It's out of this world. But experience by itself is not important because you can also get high in many things. It's just an experience. It's just ecstasy. It's just an experience. But it's the consequences, what happens after you get the experience. Nibbana is an ultimate reality which is existing. It is permanent. It does not arise and pass away like everything else in this world. Everything else in this world arises and passes away, but it does not arise, it does not pass away, it's there all the time. But it can only be perceived through the eye of wisdom if you have developed it. But let me give you another simile. Supposing there's a person who's born colorblind and he can see only in terms of black and white. Right? You show him a technicolor, multicolored poster and say how beautiful this yellow is and this green and this brown and purple and all that. Do you think he can appreciate that? He will see only black and white. So for us humans, we can only see in terms of black and white. We can only see in terms of life and death. Either you're alive or you're dead. Right? No? There's nothing in between. Right? So it's impossible to explain that to anyone. If there's no life, then you're dead. So when people talk about Nibbana, going beyond life, they think that is annihilation. They think that it's a great death, that there's nothing there, no senses, nothing to enjoy. How can anyone desire such a bizarre thing? It's because it's beyond our human comprehension. We don't have the words to describe it. We can only describe things that we can perceive through our senses, right or not? Whatever that we experience, or the whole of reality actually is based on our conditioning, how we are brought up to perceive it. So if you really want to understand reality, you must go beyond conditioning. You must go beyond all your cultural, your educational, your social conditioning. And to do that, you have to be like a scientist, be observant, be totally...
You notice that most of the monks attain enlightenment at a later stage of life. Of course, some people may take longer time, some people may take shorter period of time. But shorter period of time. But it's achievable if one were to put your minds and heart to it that way in a lifetime.
Let me ask you, you've heard of Beethoven, you've heard of Mozart, right?
Yeah.
At what age did Beethoven compose his first symphony? Huh?
He was born a prodigy.
Yeah. So we are also born prodigal meditators. They can get enlightened at a very young age. At the age of 7, they can get enlightened. It's just like...
Very rare. These are very rare.
Of course, it's very rare.
Not normal.
It's like musical talent, like athletic talent, sports talent. Not everybody is gifted. Some people are more gifted than others. Some people, you have to send them for piano lessons and tuition. They pass through a grade 8 or so. When they play, it's nothing like, it's nothing like someone who's really gifted and who hasn't attended any music class. So it's the same with meditation. If you've done it in a past life, you can do it very quickly in this life. A monk may have practiced or tried to practice for 20 years. And his level of attainment might still fall short of what it takes a housewife to do in a 20-day retreat because of what you've done in the past. So you can do better than me, Don't worry, just attend the retreat and you find out for yourself. Yes.
Like duties of the lay Buddhist.
Implied duties of the lay Buddhist. Are you a lay Buddhist? Not yet. Trying to find out whether the duties can be done or not, is it? Manageable. Well, This question was asked by someone during the Buddha's time. He's actually the Buddha's cousin. And the word Buddhist is not used during the Buddha's time, of course. Buddha did not call his teachings Buddhism. This came very much later. He called his teachings Dhamma Vinaya. Dhamma means the law of righteousness. Vinaya means discipline. So this person, his name is Mahanama, approached the Buddha and asked, to what extent is a person called an upasaka? The word used is upasaka, or for a woman will be upasika. It's a name they use for a lay disciple. So the Buddha says that one is called an upasaka, a lay disciple, if one takes refuge in the triple gem, in the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha. Taking refuge in the triple gem means taking the Buddha as the teacher who has shown us the path to liberation. Liberation from this round of birth and death, to go beyond life and death. Taking refuge in the Dhamma is believing that the Dhamma, the teachings of the Buddha, is actually the way that will lead us there. And the Dhamma also includes Nibbana itself. Nibbana is something real, an ultimate reality that can be realized and attained. Taking refuge in the Sangha, Sangha means the disciples of the Buddha, the robed disciples of the Buddha, means that one looks upon these followers of the Buddha as those who are perpetuating the Buddha's teaching through practice as well as teaching. So taking refuge in this triple gem, we call them. This is the basic definition of an upasaka, a lay disciple. Then he asked, what is a good lay disciple? Then the Buddha said, a good lay disciple is one who is virtuous. Virtuous means he observes the 5 precepts, which are, number 1, not taking life intentionally. Life means sentient life, not plant life, human life or animal life or fish life. Second is not taking what is not given, which means also being honest when you are declaring your income tax. Also respecting intellectual property in terms of copyright. No pirated VCDs or software for your computer. Okay. Third one is abstaining from sexual misconduct. The fourth one is abstaining from lying, from telling untruth, from deceiving people, even for the sake of others. And then the last one is abstaining from taking intoxicants, things that will make you intoxicated and unmindful. So basically, that's all. Not much. Manageable. Okay. Anybody else wants to ask any question? Yes.
From the Buddhist perspective, right, why are we really here? What you explain is like, we go through life, and then how we're supposed to handle it, right? So, but why are we really here? Why do we have to go through that stages of life in the first place?
Yeah. Because we don't understand. We don't understand that we are going to have to go through it again. So we create all the karma, all the potential, and then when we die, the potential will push us to the next existence.
I get what you're saying, but from the very first people, the very first human beings, right, why are we put here in the first place? Why do we have to even go through one life? Because that's the start of everything, right?
You are talking about the chicken and the egg lah. Which one comes first? Right? The chicken and the egg question is also something that has to be swept under the carpet. People ask these questions, they can't get an answer, just sweep it under the carpet. But the Buddha says, it's just a circle. Where is the beginning of the circle? Right. So actually, the cause is ignorance and craving. Because of ignorance, because we don't understand, we keep on doing things. We want this, we want that to satisfy our desires. When we do all these things, we create karma. Karma means creating the potential, the energy potential that will give fruit in a later part of existence.
In other way, they say you want this, we want that. So in other way, to release everything, say we give this, we give that, and help this, we help that, to release everything, be happy.
Oh, I see. She says that, in other words, it means that if we practice non-attachment or generosity, we give away things, we give this away, we give that away, and we help this and help that, and that will bring us happiness. That's one way of doing things that can give you some degree of happiness. But that's not the ultimate happiness, because the ultimate happiness is nirvana. So when you give things away, it's helpful. Because the basic cause of our suffering is rooted in greed, hatred, and delusion. Maybe I shouldn't use the word greed, because the word greed in English has got certain connotations that are not wide enough. When I say greed, what does it mean to you? It means desiring something more than what you need, right? But that's not what is meant when we use the word loba. Loba means having any form of attachment, any form of desire. Liking a cup of coffee is also loba. Having a preference, liking this to that, is also loba. Also in English, hatred is something very intense. You hate somebody. But it's not that, From the point of view of Buddhism, it means even a slight dislike. Any unpleasant mental state that you have is really dosa. So when you give away things, you learn to cut down this greed, you cut down this attachment. Because we are attached to a property we don't want to give away, right? When you give away more and more, you practice non-attachment. When you help people, you practice non-self. Because you're always thinking of yourself. You want to satisfy our selfish desires. When you help people, you become selfless. So that's one way of helping you to lessen or reduce selfishness and greed or attachment. But in the end, you have to give away not only material things, you have to give away all your defilements, give away your conceit, give away your greed, give away your hatred, your unpleasant states of mind, give away everything. So you start with something material and you end up with something mental or emotional. In the end, we have to give up everything, our body also. As you watch the rising and passing away of phenomena, you know that whatever that you can experience through your senses are all rising and passing away from moment to moment. So that also has to be given away. When you give everything away, you get the nirvana. Okay, Bob.
Bhante, you talk about non-self. Non-self, is it a state of mind, a conceptual thinking about us that we don't have ourselves? What do you mean by non-self?
What do I mean by non-self? Is it something conceptual or what? Non-self has also many different levels. The word selflessness was in the English language even before Buddhism came in, I guess. Because selflessness is not a Buddhist term. It's an English term. When a person is so altruistic that he's selfless in his service, you say that he's selfless, which means that he doesn't think of himself. From the Buddhist point of view, selflessness or non-self has different aspects, different levels. Helping others in a selfless way, in an altruistic way, is also one level of non-self. But the more profound level of non-self comes into a very atomic or molecular level. When you see things arising and passing away from moment to moment. When you see the light fluctuating, you see all the cells, all the atoms and molecules in your body are changing. You see all the thought patterns, the thoughts arising and passing away from moment to moment. Then you see that there's no self. When there's no self, it means that you see also the conditioning. That they are not just arising and passing away without any connection with one another. There's a connection, there's a conditioning, there's a cause behind every arising and passing away. As you watch that in meditation, then you recognize, oh, there's a cause. Why is there this thought? Because of this thought. Why is this thought? Because of this thought. Why is this thought? Because I saw something. Right? Not sometimes you walk on the street, you see something pop, then you activate some memory somewhere. And then that memory activates something. So you begin to see this cause and effect relationship. And then you realize that there is no permanent, unchanging entity that is called self. There is no I, the so-called I. Who is the I anyway? Are you the same when you were 3 years old? And are you the same now? Will you be the same when you are 80 years old? If you ever get there. No? Or maybe 70, right? So there's no I. It's changing all the time. When we use the word I, we use the word self, it is only used in a conventional, conceptual way for us to talk with one another. From the ultimate point of view, there are only atoms and molecules. There are only discrete particles, things arising and passing away from moment to moment. But because we live in a world, we need to communicate with one another, so we make use of words like self and I and you. Right? But the Buddha, although he makes use of such words, is not deluded into thinking that there is unchanging. Yes.
You have been talking about trying to find happiness for our own, to achieve the highest level of happiness for our own. What is Buddhism's view, instead of focusing on our own, Buddhism's view on trying to reduce suffering of others.
Okay. So far I've been talking about having happiness for oneself, but what is the Buddhist point of view regarding creating happiness for others and reducing suffering around us? Peace starts from within. When you yourself are peaceful, when you yourself are happy, then only you understand the true meaning of what it is, and you can help others to attain the same state of mind. If you are not peaceful, you are not happy, you go out to the streets and you go on a demonstration and you start shouting, peace, there should be no war, peace, peace. You are very disturbed and agitated inside. There's no peace. You cannot help others to attain peace and happiness when you yourself have not done it. That is the whole rationale behind Theravada Buddhism. The Buddha himself got peace and happiness first before he started to preach to others. So the Buddha also encouraged his disciples to follow his footsteps. Try to attain peace and happiness, real peace and happiness within yourself, and then spread it to others. But as I said, there are also many different levels of doing that. Not everybody can become monks or nuns. Not everybody can become enlightened to first, second, or third, or fourth stage. The Buddha, during his time, gave discourses based on the individual's personal capacity, inclinations, dispositions, and temperaments. Most of his talks that deal with meditation and cultivation of the mind are addressed to monks. When he talks to lay people, he will tell them to do merit, be generous, give not only to monks, to those who are in need, help the poor, support your family, be responsible, lead a virtuous life by observing the 5 precepts. Create a lot of merits so that next time you'll be reborn in a good existence. That's all, for lay people. That's what the Buddha would usually preach. There are hardly any suttas that really talk about meditation or cultivation that were addressed to lay people. If there are, I think, a very small handful. And yet, there were lay people who got enlightened simply by listening to a Dhamma talk without even having to go for a retreat. Why? They were like Mozart and Beethoven. These were all prodigies. When they listened to the Buddha, it was just like a catalyst, that ignited something that they had done in the past. So these people who got enlightened while they were lay people remained in the lay life. Some of them even attained to the 3rd stage of enlightenment. The 3rd stage of enlightenment means that a person does not have any more sensual desires, no more sexual desires, no more desires for objects of the 5 senses. And yet, he's still a lay person, not a monk. Why? Because circumstances require so. Your parents' intellectual understanding.
Between intelligence and intellectuality and in the process of achieving nirvana.
Okay, intelligence, intellectuality, and the process of attaining nirvana. You want to see the relationship between the 3 of them. Intelligence is having the ability to be wise and to be able to grasp things quickly. And that could be applied to the world or to apply to the scriptures. But not necessarily everyone who is intelligent is already qualified to walk the path to nirvana. I will illustrate with a story afterwards. The second is talking about intellectuality. Intellectuality is just the ability to conceptualize and think in terms of logic and concepts, to reason out things, to justify. People who are intellectual are very good at justifying whatever they do. The path of enlightenment need not have these 2. But it does not mean that with these 2, you cannot go. With these 2 also, you can walk the path of enlightenment. But without these 2 also, you can walk the path of enlightenment, depending on what you have accumulated in the past. There is a story of a monk in Burma, popularly called Sunman Sayadaw. Sayadaw means reverend teacher. He was a farmer, illiterate farmer. Suddenly, he felt motivated to meditate for no apparent reason. He just started to see omens of people dying, and he could predict things are going to happen to certain people. And then he went around asking how to meditate, and someone told him, just to watch your breath in, out, watching, touching, knowing, touching, knowing. So he did that, and eventually he became an arahant by himself, without any teacher, just by following that simple instructions. He was an illiterate farmer. He cannot read, he cannot write. He was very bad at memorizing things in school, so he was a farmer. And then after he attained arahantship, some of these other sayadaws, learned sayadaws who were learned in the texts, in the scriptures, taught him how to develop psychic powers. It doesn't mean that when you become an arahant, you are automatically endowed with psychic powers. Becoming an arahant means you just eradicate your defilements. If you want to develop psychic powers, you have to do something else. So they taught him, and then because he had no defilements, very easily he attained the psychic powers. So he tried to recollect his past life to see what he did in the past that made him deserve to become an arahant now, an illiterate farmer. So he recollected his past life, and in one remote past life, he was a parrot. And he donated a fruit to a Buddha, a Sammasambuddha at that time. I forget whether it's Kassapa or the one before him. And because of that dana, of that offering he made to the Buddha when he was a parrot, that was the main condition for him to become an arahant in this life. After that life, he recollected to see that he had very few human lives, and most of his lives were animals and birds. Very little human lives. That's why he's so unintelligent. He's unintelligent, he's not intellectual, but he can walk the Noble Eightfold Path and he can get enlightened. Yet, there are also many famous scholars in Burma who are intelligent, intellectual, and they also attain. So it doesn't make